A new and potentially dangerous confrontation is unfolding in Syria, this time involving three U.S. partners: Israel, Turkey, and the new Syrian government. Israel has carried out a series of airstrikes on a Syrian military airbase in Idlib, and Jerusalem says it did so to prevent Turkey from deploying troops there. But the strike has triggered an unusual diplomatic backlash. Syria has condemned Israel. Turkey has condemned Israel. The United Arab Emirates has condemned Israel. And even Washington, Israel's closest ally, has described the attack as an unnecessary escalation that does not advance regional stability. So why did Israel strike this particular base? And why has Turkey suddenly become the central issue? The target was the Abu al-Dur military airbase in northwestern Syria's Idlib province, roughly 70 kilometers from the Turkish border. Syrian state media reported that Israel carried out 8 airstrikes on the facility early Tuesday. The strikes hit the runway and storage facilities. There were no reported casualties, but the base suffered material damage. Reuters confirmed the strikes after Syrian state media reported the attack. And Israel's explanation is very specific. According to the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Syria had been close to violating an agreed security status quo by allowing Turkish troops to deploy at an airbase near Aleppo. Israel says it had repeatedly warned Damascus that such a deployment would pose a threat to Israeli security. And according to Netanyahu's office, Syria ignored those warnings. The message from Jerusalem was blunt. Israel will not tolerate threats to its security, and it said it would welcome a return to the previous security arrangement. But there is an important question here. Did Turkey actually deploy troops to Abu al-Dur? So far, Ankara has not confirmed that Turkish forces were deployed at the base. Turkey has instead rejected Israel's entire argument, accusing Netanyahu's government of using what Ankara called frivolous allegations to justify attacks on Syrian territory. Turkey says the Israeli strikes violate Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And that is where the story becomes much bigger than one airbase. Because Turkey has become one of the most important external powers backing Syria's new government. Syria's previous ruler, Bashar al-Assad, was overthrown in December 2024 after rebel forces entered Damascus. His fall completely changed the regional balance. The new authorities in Damascus, led by President Ahmed al-Sharaa, have moved closer to Turkey and the West. Turkey has provided support to the Syrian military and has been involved in efforts to rebuild Syria's damaged defense infrastructure. Abu al-Dur itself had been out of service as a dedicated military airfield for years. It was captured by rebel forces during the final offensive that brought down Assad's government. Now, Syria is attempting to rebuild military institutions and facilities destroyed or abandoned during years of civil war. And Turkey has been helping. That growing Turkish role is precisely what worries Israel. Israel has increasingly viewed Turkish influence in post-Assad Syria as a strategic challenge. The concern is not simply about Turkish soldiers. It is also about Turkish military equipment, training, air defense systems, and the possibility that Ankara could eventually establish a much stronger military footprint inside Syria. For Israel, that could restrict its freedom to conduct air operations over Syrian territory. And that is especially important because Israel has carried out repeated strikes inside Syria since Assad's fall. The targets have included Syrian military infrastructure and strategic weapons systems. So the fall of Assad did not end the conflict around Syria. It changed the players. And now Israel and Turkey are increasingly finding themselves on opposite sides of the post-Assad security equation. That tension has been building for months. Israel has repeatedly accused Turkey of trying to expand its influence across Syria. Turkey, meanwhile, has accused Israel of undermining Syria's sovereignty and destabilizing the country. But until now, the United States has tried to prevent that rivalry from turning into a direct confrontation. Washington is now facing an increasingly difficult balancing act. The U.S. supports Israel. The U.S. also has a strategic relationship with Turkey. And Washington is simultaneously trying to work with Syria's new leadership. That explains the unusually sharp American reaction to this latest strike. Tom Barak, the U.S. ambassador to Turkey and Washington's special envoy for Syria and Iraq, said the United States was deeply concerned about the Israeli strikes. He called them an unnecessary escalation that does not advance regional stability. Barack said the U.S. continues to believe that restraint and engagement are the more constructive path, and he urged all sides to prioritize dialogue instead of further military incidents. But Barack went further. He defended the approach of Syria's new leadership. According to him, President Ahmed al-Shara has neither adopted a predatory posture nor maintained proxy forces. Barack said the Syrian government has repeatedly indicated that it prefers de-escalation with Israel. That is significant, because Israel's central argument has been that the new Syrian government cannot be trusted with military capabilities that could eventually threaten Israel. Washington appears to be taking a more cautious view. The U.S. is now actively working on a deconfliction mechanism involving Israel, Turkey, and Syria. The objective is simple: prevent a misunderstanding from turning into a direct military confrontation. Because the danger is no longer just Israel versus Syria, Turkey could now become directly involved. And if Israeli and Turkish forces ever find themselves operating in close proximity inside Syria, the consequences could be enormous. Both countries are powerful militaries. Both have aircraft operating across the region, and both are U.S. partners. That makes Syria an extraordinarily difficult diplomatic problem for Washington, and Israel's strike has already triggered a broader regional backlash. Syria's Foreign Minister Assad al-Shibani called the attack an unjustified act of aggression and a violation of Syrian sovereignty. Turkey demanded a stronger international response. The UAE also condemned the strikes in the strongest terms. Abu Dhabi said Israel's attacks violate Syria's sovereignty and international law and warned that continued strikes could further destabilize the region. Qatar, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia also joined the condemnation. The UAE's reaction is particularly notable. Abu Dhabi and Israel have diplomatic relations, but the UAE has increasingly criticized Israeli military operations when it believes they threaten regional stability or violate the sovereignty of Arab states. And Syria is now one of those flashpoints. The UAE has called for international action to stop repeated Israeli attacks on Syrian territory and prevent a wider escalation. Meanwhile, Israel is insisting that its actions are defensive. Jerusalem's argument is that Syria had been about to cross a security red line by allowing Turkish forces to establish themselves at the airbase. In other words, Israel is saying it acted before the threat materialized. Turkey is saying that justification is fabricated. Syria says it is an assault on its sovereignty. And Washington says the military response was unnecessary. There is another important layer to this story. The United States has already been mediating talks between Israel and Syria over a possible security agreement. Those discussions have been underway for more than a year. The goal has been to create a framework for preventing military incidents and defining security arrangements after Assad's fall. In January, Israel and Syria agreed during U.S.-mediated talks to establish a communication mechanism covering security and intelligence issues. But a broader security agreement has still not been reached. And every Israeli strike inside Syria makes that diplomatic process harder. Because Damascus wants recognition of its sovereignty. Israel wants guarantees that Syria cannot become a security threat. Turkey wants a major role in rebuilding and defending Syria. And the United States wants all three sides to avoid a confrontation that could spiral beyond anyone's control. That is why Abu al-Dur matters. On the surface, this was an airstrike against a military base. But strategically, Israel was sending a message to Damascus and Ankara. Do not allow Syria to become a platform for a Turkish military presence that Israel considers threatening. Turkey's response sends the opposite message. Ankara will not accept Israel dictating what happens inside Syria. And Washington is now trying to keep those two positions from colliding. There is also a broader Israeli objective. Analysts have suggested that the strike may have been intended not only to stop a possible Turkish deployment, but also to warn Syria against rebuilding a military infrastructure that could eventually challenge Israel. That makes the airbase more than just a military target. It becomes a symbol of the struggle over who gets to shape post-Assad Syria. For years, Iran and Russia were major external powers inside the country. After Assad's fall, that equation changed. Russia's influence has been reduced. Iran's position has been weakened. Turkey has expanded its role. Israel has increased its military freedom of action. And the United States is trying to manage all of it without allowing its allies to turn Syria into another regional battlefield. The immediate military confrontation may now be over, but the diplomatic fallout is only beginning. Israel has shown that it is prepared to strike facilities it believes could be used by Turkish forces. Turkey has shown that it will publicly challenge that justification. Syria is demanding respect for its sovereignty. Arab states are warning against further escalation. And Washington is building a deconfliction mechanism precisely because it sees the risk of an accidental or deliberate confrontation growing. The biggest question now is not simply whether Turkey will deploy troops to Abu al-Dur. It is whether Israel and Turkey can operate inside the same post-Assad Syria without eventually coming into direct conflict. Because if that happens, Washington could face one of its most difficult dilemmas yet. How do you prevent two strategic partners from fighting each other on the territory of a country that is only beginning to recover from a devastating civil war? For now, the United States is calling for restraint. Israel is insisting on security red lines. Turkey is rejecting Israeli claims. And Syria is demanding sovereignty. But the Abu al-Dur strike has made one thing unmistakably clear. The battle for post-Assad Syria is no longer simply about rebuilding the country. It is about deciding who gets to shape its military future, and how far each regional power is willing to go to stop the others.